Thank you, fellow citizens. Good afternoon. And I will introduce myself as under the name with which I was born here in Talbot County near St. Michael's. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. And of course, I ended up changing my name some years later after I escaped from bondage. I assure you, I stole this head, this body, from my master and ran off with it. Good for you. And so I just wanted to take care of some preliminaries. The women who introduced me did a fine job. I remember when I was in New Bedford touring with the Garrison movement, and Mr. Collins would introduce me to the audience like this, about 4 or 5 times the size, and he would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, I present today Fred Douglass. He is the graduate from the Peculiar Institution of Slavery with his diploma written on his back." And so if any man told me that I would be here today in Talbot County speaking to this audience, I would have thought him about as insane if he had predicted I would one day go on a mission to the moon. But you have called me to speak, and I have obeyed your call. Actually, Maryland is now a glorious free state. Time has, I am glad to see, touch many of you gently. And so I wanted to just scan the audience here. Of course, I came here in 1877 to revisit my master, Mr. Thomas Hall. And whenever I come back to Talbot County, I'm looking for some people, specifically the Baileys and the Washingtons. Are there any of the ancestors of Betsy Bailey in the audience? No? Washington, my father's surname. And what about the Alls or the Anthonys? None. Well, it wouldn't be beyond the stretch of imagination. I mean, I come back to the modern era quite frequently, and I was in Chesapeake, Virginia a few years back in this modern era, and a gentleman walked up to me and introduced himself as a third cousin of Thomas Hall. And of course, I know that name quite well, spending some time with the Alls here in Talbot County. And so, the peculiar topic that I'm speaking on today is emancipation. And of course, after I say my piece on emancipation, if you have any questions about my life and times and things you might have seen or heard around Talbot County about my life and times, I will certainly be happy to answer any questions that I can remember with the 207-year-old mind. Yes. And so, of course, you do understand that I was born here in Talbot County near St. Michael's along the Tuckahoe River around the year 1818. And I was taken away from my mother before I even finished nursing. She was sold to a plantation about 12 miles away, and I never saw her during the light of day. She would occasionally walk a handful of times, 12 miles, just to rock me to sleep at night. And by the time I woke the next morning, she would be gone back to her plantation to answer the bell for hard labor. Of course, not knowing the date of my birth, the only thing I had to cling to was, I do remember, once my mother brought me a heart-shaped cake, and she called me her little Valentine. And so for that reason, I decided to use February 14th as my birthday. And so when next time you are celebrating Valentine's Day, remember you also celebrating yours truly. And as a matter of fact, when I came back and I was sitting beside the bed of Mr. Thomas Hall, he actually confirmed that I was born around 1818. I mean, slaves did not know the dates of their births as much as any hog or any cow. The closest we could come would be planting time or harvest time. An educated slave was a worthless slave, was the mantra of any slave master in Maryland at that time. And of course, the divine providence that I would leave around 8 years old and be sent to Baltimore to live with Master Hall's cousins, Hugh and Sophia Hall, who treated me quite well. They had never owned slaves before. They were in Baltimore. And Mrs. Hall, Miss Sophia, would risk her reputation to teach me a few ABCs, a few letters, words from the Bible, the newspaper. And of course, once I had a few words to describe my misery as a slave, my mind became free, and thus my body had to follow. You cannot enslave a freed mind. Once your mind is free, your body has to follow. And so I was there until Captain Anthony's demise, and then they called me back here to Talbot County. And they put me out in the middle of a field, and they reconciled all the property of Mr. Anthony, all the horses and cows and sheep and plows and such, and we were all counted as a number and then divvied out to those who would be inheriting that property. And my divine providence was that I would be sent back to Baltimore. And of course, I was reading, learning the best I could with the few letters I had, and then I heard Mr. Alls ask his wife, Sophia, I understand you're teaching that boy how to read. She said, yes, husband, what harm could that do? He said, well, it's against the rules. You will make him good for nothing. An educated slave is a worthless slave. Do not teach that boy how to read. And so then I was left to my own devices to learn how to read. I would trick the boys into sharing a letter or an alphabet. I would trick them by betting them that I could make a W in the sand, and I would make the W, and then he would have to show me how to make the Q. Or I might trade a biscuit for a word from his notebook or such. And then finally, I did get quite unruly. That rule is certainly true. After some knowledge, my mind is filled with knowledge. I'm not thinking about doing chores. I'm thinking about getting an education. And so they sent me back to Talbot County and put me under the servitude of a notorious slave breaker by the name of Edward Colby. I stayed with Mr. Colby for about a year. I was sent there to Mr. Freeland's plantation, where I tried to escape with 4 others. Ended up in jail in Talbot County for about 6 months. Until Mr. Thomas came and bailed me out. I thought he was going to sell me off down south to Mississippi or Alabama. But he sent me back again to Baltimore. And so I'm there in Baltimore, and I'm trying to learn how to read and write. And of course, I'm spending time with a lay minister in Baltimore, and he's teaching me how to read from the Bible. And I noticed this book on the streets of Baltimore in a bookstore. And I purchased this book for 75 cents. Care to know how I would get this book? 75 cents. I bought myself, I went out in the woods and I found myself a stump, some shoe polish, and a brush. I set up a shoe shine stand on the streets of Baltimore. And as the men would pass by, I would say, 5 cents to shine your shoe, sir. 1 cent to dust your off. And with 75 cents, I purchased this book, Columbian Order. And in it, there's great poems and speeches and such. The very first poem that I learned how to recite out loud is right here in this book. Here it is. The boys would be walking along from school or to school, and they would stop and they would talk about the lessons of the day. They might recite a poem or practice part of a speech or such. And when I got this book, this poem was very familiar that I heard the boys recite. You'd scarce expect one of my age to speak in public on the stage. And if I chance to fall below Demosthenes or Cicero, don't view me with the critic's eye, but pass my imperfections by. Large streams from little fountains flow, tall oaks from little acorns grow. And though I am now small and young, of judgment weak and feeble tongue, yet all great learned men like me once learned to read their ABC. Yes. So I do all of this to set the stage for the things I might accomplish later in life. By the time I came back here, my former master, Thomas All, referred to me as general counsel. I had eventually ended up being the ambassador to the country of Haiti. At that time, I was the U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia. And so I assure you that from those mighty lofts, from where I ended, to here in Talbot County, the distance is considerable. And the difficulty in getting from the former to the latter is by no means slight. I would say to any young person who might be in the audience, I understand I asked this councilwoman here if the children were in school. She said they're already in school today, so I missed the opportunity. But I would assure you, and I would ask you to pass it on to them, once you can read, you will be forever free. And I'm sure you all understand as well, it is easier to build strong children than repair broken men. And so, with that said, this topic of emancipation. Well, it started with the word abolition. I did not know what this word meant. I started hearing rumors of abolition, the abolition of slavery. When I was in Baltimore, I couldn't read the newspapers, but I kept hearing people talking about this word abolition. And once I was able to decipher the definition of abolition, to end, to bring to an end, and then I decided that I would want to end this bondage, this system of bondage. And I set out on that course. When I left here, dressed as a sailor, my future wife, Anna Mary, had sold her bedpost to buy me a ticket so that I might catch a train out of Baltimore, through Annapolis, to Harvard and Grace, and then to New York. And once I arrived in New York, we arrived at the home of Mr. David Ruggles, who was part of the Underground Railroad, and he introduced us to a fine minister. We got married, sir. My anniversary is September the 13th. What is yours? I mean, I don't need to put you on the spot.
February 7th, 1963.
Well, wonderful. And my wife was wearing a plume-colored dress. She was very beautiful, as I'm sure was yours.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, I'm there in New York, and Mr. Ruggles is questioning me. He's trying to figure out where he should send me from New York. What skills I might have gained over the time in my career in bondage. And I was working in Baltimore at the time as a ship's caulker in the shipyards of Fells Point, Baltimore. And he said straightway, we're going to send you to New Bedford, Massachusetts. They are looking for green hands. It's a whaling town, and I think you might find a career there. And so I make my way, my wife and I, to New Bedford, and we started living with Mr. Nathan and Polly Johnson. Now, I had changed my name a couple of times throughout this ordeal of escaping from bondage. I changed my name to Fred Stanley, and then by the time I arrived in New Bedford, Fred Johnson, Mr. and Mrs. Fred Johnson. And we were living with Nathan and Polly Johnson, and it seemed like every Negro that ran away to New Bedford named himself Johnson. I said to Mr. Johnson, I need to find a new name. I might get lost in the fray. And so he was reading at the time. I don't know if there are any people of Irish descent in the audience. Anybody from Ireland? Irish descent? Irish heritage? Yes, yes. Well, you might be familiar with the tale of Lady of the Lake is the name of the book. It's an Irish tale, massive tale, and the main character's name is Douglas. And so he said, what about the name Douglas? And so I said, well, as long as I can keep my first name, I want to keep some semblance of myself. And so now you know me as Frederick Douglass. Yes. And so now I'm just biding my time. I heard about this man, William Lord Garrison, who is a Quaker, and has established his own anti-slavery society there in Massachusetts. And he shows up one night in the middle of a church service just like this, and I'm speaking to the audience. I'm telling them about my life and times, and they come up to me afterwards and they said, Fred Douglass, we'd like to hire you. Well, first of all, we want you to come to Nantucket Island and speak to our audience. And so I went to Nantucket and went to their convention and spoke to the audience. It was a huge audience, and I hardly remember 2 words that I said on that night, but the audience went wild. I mean, at that time, they didn't have many narratives that they could cling to show and or hear about the narrative, the life of a slave. And so they hired me straight away to become an agent for the Garrisonian movement, and we went on a 100 conventions tour fighting for the abolition of slavery, which would, of course, end up being the emancipation of my people. Whole millions of my fellow men and women in bondage. And of course, I started there and wrote my first narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. And when I wrote that narrative, of course, it brought me some very unwanted attention. As a matter of fact, they found out that I was in New Bedford. And the Garrisons came to me and said, well, either you throw that book in the fire or you need to get out of the country. And so I found myself on a ship sailing for Liverpool, the RMS Cambria. And we landed in Liverpool. I was only supposed to be there for 4 days. And I ended up spending 4 months in Ireland. I traveled everywhere from the Giant's Causeway to Cape Fear. Yes. And they treated me quite well. I would say at that time, this was just before the potato famine, that they were very impoverished people, but they had a sense of purpose and humanity, and they treated me as an equal human being. And I stayed there for 4 months, and then I went on to England, where I ended up getting my manumission in England. Julia Griffiths, the Richardson family, and others in England raised money to help me purchase my freedom. Anyone care to guess how much it might be that they paid for my freedom? Yes, sir.
I think it was about $777.
Well, I guess with a tip, sir, yes. $733. Yes. And so, with my manumission, I came back to the United States. I grabbed my family, which is now growing. There in Lynn, we had our firstborn, Rosetta, and then Frederick Jr. And then by this time, before I left, we had taken my family from New Bedford to Lynn. And then my other sons were born, Charles and Louis. And I grabbed them up and we moved to Rochester, New York. And Rochester, of course, you might have read or heard that it was a formidable time in my career. I had established my newspaper, the North Star newspaper, talking about the abolition of slavery, talking about the emancipation of my people, and fighting for women, fighting for the rights of women as well. Meet these wild women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, all of these women in that area. The McClintocks, Mary McClintock, they all were demanding their equal rights. And so I joined forces with them, and in 1848, I stood beside the women at the temple there in Seneca Falls for the first woman's suffrage convention. And so all these things are building me, showing me the way towards what freedom means and what emancipation means. And of course, in order to do this, I had to make some decisions. Now, this is how we arrive at a real emancipation of my people. Of course, meeting Mr. Garrison, he was a Quaker. He was a non-voter. They thought that we could change the country by mere moral suasion. Well, it turns out that John Brown was right. There was no morality in slavery at all, and there would have to be a civil war. And so how did I shed the philosophy of William Lord Garrison by saying that the Constitution, literally, I would hear him say many times that this Constitution is a flawed document, it should be torn up and rewritten. Well, you might think that if you never read the Constitution. I hope you have.
Yes.
And if you have read the Constitution, then you will know that there is no mention of the term slave, slaveholder, slave master, or slave state. Neither is there a reference to color. So I would ask then, any man, to read the Constitution and tell me where he will find a guarantee for slavery. As a matter of fact, I carry this Constitution into my heart. And just as a reminder, where is it? I think I left it in my carriage. I carry the Confederate Constitution in my back pocket, where they clearly took out the ambiguity of the United States Constitution and made slavery a centerpiece of the Constitution. And so here we are. Now I understand the Constitution as a remedy to our issue, not a problem. That this Constitution is not a dead letter, that it is a living idea. And if it is not a dead letter, then you can add paragraphs to the letter. And then once I started understanding the Constitution and our system of government, then I started realizing what it would take to add a paragraph or two to the Constitution. And so, we come to this crossroad of, will there be a war? Will there be a war? And many people say that the thing that set it off were the first shots of Fort Sumter. I don't think so. I think it was John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. When he went down there and in his attempt to not just take the arsenal and the weapons, but to establish a new government in Virginia, he was captured and hung. That is what set the world on fire. That is what alarmed all the slaveholders of the South. As a matter of fact, they caught him and gave him a quick hanging, and they were looking for me. I had to leave the country again. I ended up in England again. But I assure you that it was probably John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. You remember, I don't know how well read you all are. You visit the library. I hope you occasionally checked out some novels, occasionally, and read the great novels of the time. Herman Melville, anyone know what novel he might have written? Moby Dick, yes. Yes, he was in New Bedford years before me on the whaling ships and got his experience to write that novel. And he actually, if I could tell you the story of John Brown, he best talked about the hanging of John Brown as a poet. I'm a poet myself. I love poetry. And Herman Melville describes the hanging of John Brown in a succinct poem. Hanging from the beam, slowly swaying, such the law. Gaunt the shadow on your green, Shenandoah. The cut is on the crown, lo, John Brown, and the stab shall heal no more. Hidden in the cap is the anguish none can draw, so your future veils its face, Shenandoah. But the streaming beard is shown, weird John Brown, meteor of the war. It's called the portent, the foretelling of what is to come, the Civil War, which they thought would be very short. They had set up picnics on the hillside just to watch the battle until it became a long, protracted, bloody conflict. And now we start immediately lining Abraham Lincoln. We start recruiting black soldiers to say we should be fighting in the war. And the pushback we got from President Lincoln and his cabinet was that certainly we cannot give the colored men weapons. They should hold their place in ferrying supplies, cutting brush, cutting a way through the jungle for the soldiers. We said, no. The black men and men of Massachusetts, Chris McZadix, the first black man to be killed in the Revolutionary War. If we were good enough to fight alongside Washington, then why would we not good enough to fight alongside McClellan? And of course, Abraham Lincoln, a prudent and honest boatman that he was, didn't change right away, but he listened. And as time and events changed, he came to see things our way. And then on the first day of January 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. With some clauses. I mean, we read, I was in Boston, Massachusetts with my sons, Charles and Lewis, and we read this Emancipation Proclamation over, and some parts of it were very perplexing. That he would exclude the 48 counties of West Virginia, Port Clemens, St. Bernard, St. George, Norfolk, Terrebonne, and such. Well, he's not freeing the slaves at all. Well, at least not in the border states. Because, why? They were also slaveholders fighting on the side of the Union, and he didn't want to upset them and cause defections in the Union Army. So he gave them 100 days until the end of the war, that hopefully the war would end. Of course, we know that Lee surrendered and the Union was saved. My sons, on that very, I think it was January the 5th, that we went straightway to Boston, and my sons Charles and Lewis joined the Union Army, the 54th Regiment. They fought in the Civil War. They fought at Fort Sumter. And so my other son, Frederick Jr., he was out in the Mississippi Valley recruiting soldiers. And we were still recruiting. We recruited 900 soldiers in New Jersey and Connecticut for the 29th Infantry Division. And then all the recruiting came to a screeching halt. As I was talking to the colored men about joining and fighting for the flag, they said, well, we're not getting our just due. And so for the first time, I ended up finding myself face to face with Abraham Lincoln to file 3 grievances. First, Mr. President, we are not getting equal pay. Secondly, sir, there seems to be no black officers in the ranks leading our soldiers. And thirdly, sir, there is no such thing as a black prisoner of war. Any colored man caught on the battlefield is immediately hung or lynched. And so, Mr. Lincoln, the honest boatman that he was, he listened carefully. He promised us equal pay. He offered me a commission as an officer. I said, well, no, sir. My sons are fit to fight, not me. But of course, now you understand we have emancipation in our hands. And that this emancipation would be delayed and not arriving into Galveston, Texas until June the 19th of 1865. It took that long for Gordon Grangers to arrive in Galveston, Texas with the 4th General Order demanding that all colored people in Texas be set free. That the General Order would say to some effect, the relationship that was formerly between slave and master is now between employer and employee. And so that started our Jubilee. What do you all call it now? We called it Jubilee. Juneteenth. not twist of words. But yes, Jubilee went all over the country. We were celebrating our emancipation. Our Jubilee celebrations, I don't know what your Juneteenth celebrations look like, but they were full of promise and people and businesses and churches and schools, people talking about the possibilities of the colored man being fully enfranchised in American democracy. Imagine that.
I'm still imagining it.
Excuse me, ma'am?
I said I'm still imagining it.
Oh, well, certainly justice does take a long time to reach. And I'm getting from some of you that you still might be on the struggle. I would certainly say this to you. I mean, it is a long fight. I mean, in my lifetime, being born in 1818 and in 1895, the last thing I remember, we were still fighting. 74 years. And so this democracy is set up in such a way that it's a pendulum. It swings back and forth, and everybody has a different idea of what a more perfect union is. And as soon as you win some prize like the Emancipation, it is no time to throw a party necessarily, unless it's going to be productive. I mean, you understand, there are 4 boxes to our liberty, to our freedom. And those boxes are, well, I don't have a box here to stand on, but the soapbox, the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. Yes. This Constitution is the literal Constitution on paper. And this Constitution has 3 branches of government. Your Constitution that you live in your body politic has 4 branches. And those are they. And how you live your Constitution determines whether you're sitting on a stable democracy or you're sitting on a rocky democracy. You're sitting on a pedestal now with 4 equal branches of your body politic. But as soon as you let one of them get out of whack, one of the boxes collapses. Now you're about to fall out of the chair. Yes. So, how do we protect this emancipation? Well, the way we were intending to protect it is that Abraham Lincoln was there to fight for our cause. He was with the radical Republicans who insisted on the end of slavery. And the way that they were going to take care of things after the Civil War is that Abraham Lincoln had this plan that 10%, as long as 10% of the voters in any given southern state pledged their allegiance to the United States Constitution, then that state would be accepted back into the Constitution, back into the Union. And his partners, the radical Republicans, well, they said 10% is definitely not enough, sir. It should be at least 50%. For them to come back into the Union, 50%. Well, unfortunately, Mr. Lincoln was assassinated. And who took his place? Yes. Not Hannibal Hamlin. Hannibal Hamlin, they had discarded him after the first presidency. I don't know if that's possible now in this modern era, that a president could serve 2 terms and have one vice president in the first and another in the second. That's exactly what happened. They discarded Hannibal Hamlin and chose Johnson because Johnson was more favorable. They were trying to appease the Southerners, and Johnson, although he said one thing, he really supported many of the Southerners. And when all the bills started passing, I mean, you understand that this Emancipation Proclamation was not the final word. More had to be done. And here's where we said we will add paragraphs to the Constitution. The first being the 13th Amendment. The Emancipation Proclamation is useless without an amendment to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment. And then the 14th Amendment, giving everyone equal protection under the law. And of course, we cannot forget the franchise. And so now we're fighting for the 15th Amendment to give us the right to vote. And here's where I'm standing with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. They want the right to vote too. Yes. So all of these things are solidifying a more perfect union, solidifying and true emancipation and ending slavery. And of course, Johnson, he vetoed everything that came across his desk. More than 13 bills by the Congress and the Senate comes to Johnson's desk, and he vetoed every last one of them. Thank God we had a majority, and we overrode all of his vetoes. We went to Mr. Johnson, a coalition of men and myself. We went to Mr. Johnson, and he's trying to explain his opposition to the cause. And I say, Mr. Johnson, President Johnson, I remember you were down in Kentucky telling the colored people down there that you are their Moses. You are the Moses of the colored people. Well, I tell you, sir, you might not be the Moses. You might, in fact, be the Pharaoh. And so, we brought about the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and we fought tooth and nail for the 15th Amendment. And unfortunately, ladies, you had to stand aside. Your paragraph to the Constitution was delayed. Did you finally add that paragraph?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful. And what paragraph did you add?
19.
Wonderful, wonderful. The 19th Amendment. I am so happy to hear that. So do you think you are making some progress?
Sometimes.
Yes, well, you have to fight for that progress, of course. Emancipation, Reconstruction was very, very difficult. Johnson dragged his feet on it. Grant tried to help, was hampered by certain problems. And then Harrison, that election, which took 4 months to decide, ended the whole thing of Reconstruction. And so, this is how we arrived at our emancipation. Through the hard work of many, many people, the Quakers and the Presbyterians and all the people who might help us escape from bondage, who might open their doors, their cellars, their churches, give money, start free produce stores that only sold goods that were free of slave hands. This is how it was accomplished. A coalition of people who put aside their differences for one common good. So if you're going to start a coalition of people now working for some cause, you cannot let purity get in the way of progress. You cannot give them some litmus test that to be on our side, you have to believe in A through X. Because certainly something is a priority. And until we get that done, we're all on the same sheet of music. That's what happened between Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Miss Anthony. when the 15th Amendment was passed and the women had to stand aside, well, let's just say, gentlemen, beware a woman scorned, sir. They were very angry at me, accused me of betraying the women. I said, Mrs. Stanton, why would I betray you and Miss Stanton? Why would I betray you? I have a daughter at home. I have a wife at home. I want them to have the franchise too. They're not just carrying one weight of sex, ma'am. They're carrying the weight of sex and race. And I certainly want them to have the elected franchise. So if I betrayed you, I would be betraying my own family, my own flesh and blood. But I cannot bring an entire nation of men along, especially when even all white men could not even vote at that time. You had to be a freeholder in order to cast a vote. In most parts of this country, you could not cast a vote, regardless of the color of your skin, unless you were a freeholder. And so how radical would it be that they would give a woman the right to vote? Give her her emancipation from all the privilege she had. I mean, I don't know if you understand what they were fighting for, ladies. Would you rather be free or have privilege? Have a nice car, a carriage. I understand you all drive cars now. This is what Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, they realized. They went into the longhouse of the Haudenosaunee women in New York, and they saw women sitting equally beside the native men making decisions about the government. And they realized we have great privilege. We have fine hats, carriages, houses. None of that belongs to us. None of that can be inherited by us. And so that's when they decided to draft this document of the Declaration of Sentiments, with Mrs. Stanton proclaiming all men and women are created equal. Yes. So, that's my take on emancipation. That's how I overcame, with the help of many others, in the abolitionist movement, the emancipation of slavery in this country. But it took a whole coalition, a whole legions of people sharing a common cause and a common good. And so, if anything, it would certainly be one of the biggest accomplishments in my lifetime to achieve the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. So, I don't want to take all of your time by just rambling on with nonsense. Maybe you all might have some questions for me. I'll be happy to answer. Yes?
Can you speak to what happened with William Tecumseh Sherman's field order that came to be known as 40 acres and a mule?
Well, that was somewhat dissolved in this where I was describing to you the difficulty in enforcing Reconstruction in the South. It literally took not only dollars, not only soldiers, but the will of the people to go down south and ensure that the land, which in most cases had been abandoned on both sides, men, sons were slaughtered. 1 million hearthstones on both sides. And so some of those properties were sitting idle. And so with Reconstruction, the Reconstruction allowed for some of that land to be given to colored people to manage and either own after a certain period of time, purchase, or if nobody came back to claim that property. Well, the problem was, of course, that Reconstruction started to fall apart. Johnson would not support it. Grant was doing the best he could, but he had some serious problems in his administration. And by the time of his end of his presidency, certainly there was not the will of the people. They were tired. They were very tired. And so then when the will of the people draws up, then the congressmen see no need to support it. Then the funding to support the troops down there dissipates. Doesn't that just sound familiar to you? Yes.
Could you speak to any relationship you have with Harriet Tubman? She was active in the military of the colored troops, and I understand, although less publicized, was active in getting the right to vote for women.
Yes, yes. Well, you know, Mrs. Ross, Araminta Ross, she was born right here in Dorchester County. It's only about a half a day's walk from here. And of course, I did not know her until after I had escaped. Her reputation met me before mine met her, I suppose. She was certainly the most of the black people, if there were one. And certainly she escaped and ended up in Philadelphia and was aided by Mrs. Mott and others and embraced in the women's movement and also fought for women's rights. But yes, she was, I mean, she did so many things. She was a spy for the Union Army. She was a head nurse at Fort Monroe, Norfolk, Virginia. When General
Benjamin Butler?
Butler, yes, thank you. I have these lapses. When General Butler enacted the contraband clause, then that started a whole flood of colored men escaping and coming to Fort Monroe to claim themselves as contraband. So many, in fact, some were arriving very malnourished, disease-ridden and such, and Harriet Tubman went there and served as a head nurse, so to speak. Yeah, so Harriet Tubman was certainly, I can find this letter. No. I keep some of my most prized letters. Oh no, this is from John Brown. But I was thinking about a letter that I wrote to Harriet Tubman. This is after she she had finished her career and come to Auburn, New York, and one of the great colonels of the war gave her some land, and she established 2 homes for the aged. She was still taking care of people there in Auburn. And she wrote me a letter asking for my endorsement of her narrative. And I wrote her a letter back telling her, well, I mean, I've spoken to many audiences like this. Mrs. Tubman only had the stars at night as her audience. The thanks of a few footsore men and women in bondage. 12, as a matter of fact, that she brought to my house in Rochester, New York. I was living on South Avenue, and in the middle of the night, Charles comes to the door. Father, there's someone at the door. I go to the door, and there stands Harriet Tubman with 12 runaways. She said, Frederick, take care of these people. I'm going back south. I have work to do. So that would give you some idea of my relationship with Harriet Tubman. Yes, ma'am.
Why did you go back to see all your slavery?
Well, he recognized, and of course his children had been following me. I met one of his grandchildren I was in a parade in Philadelphia going down the street, and I get to the corner, and here stands one of his grandchildren waving at me. So he certainly knew of the things that I had accomplished after I escaped. And he actually referred to me as Marshall Douglass, based on my position at the time. And he said, I'm so surprised that you would come here. And I said, sir, it's not that I love Caesar less than Rome. I loved freedom more than I loved my master. And it was somewhat very emotional to see a man who was full of life and vigor when I left here at 8 years old, now an invalid in the bed, seeing his last days. But what was in my mind was to just merely remind him that whatever I might have been able to accomplish in my lifetime, when he say I leaped over the moon, all I was after was the same thing that he was after. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To have a family, to have some land and a house, and leave something for my inheritance. That's what any man wants in this country. And in spite of the fact that so many hurdles were put over me, that I had to leave so high, that I would become the U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia, that I would become the president of the Freedmen's Bank and Trust, that I would become the ambassador to the country of Haiti. All I wanted to do was walk across a few acres of Maryland. He understood. Yes. Yes, sir, you got a question.
I don't want to upset you, but in the now, going on 150 years since your passing, I got to tell you that there is now efforts to name military bases in honor of Confederate generals, resurrect statues in honor of Confederate generals, tell the story of slavery in a way that doesn't embarrass the United States. How do you react to that, and how do you want us to react to that?
Well, I would say, this is what I told those folks after the Civil War who were perpetuating this lost cause narrative. You are the apostles of forgetfulness. That you would leave out the sufferings of whole millions of fellow men and women in bondage. You are the apostles of forgetfulness. But I would also say that, I don't know what these monuments look like. We erected a monument, and I will end with this speech that I gave to Mr. Lincoln, with the Emancipation Monument in Washington, D.C. There was controversy around that monument. Although it was paid by the pennies, nickels, and dollars of colored people, many people did not like that monument.
That's the one in Lincoln Park?
That's the one where Lincoln is standing proudly with his right hand on the Emancipation Proclamation and his hand extended to Archer Alexander. So, oddly enough, I was recently in Annapolis. Now, Annapolis holds a place in my heart because I went there in 1879 to recite from memory the resignation speech of George Washington. That's a very powerful speech. And so, on my return in this modern era to Annapolis, one of the gentlemen says to me, Mr. Douglass, are you aware that there was a monument here erected in the memory of the Supreme Court Justice who decided against Dred Scott? Yes, Roger Taney. And I said, do you mean they took it down, sir? And he said, it's gone. And I said, well, I'm very disappointed. I wanted another chance to give him another piece of my mind. I mean, we have to add some context. If this thing is going to exist and stand, there should be some context added to it. When I came back here, the first time that I came back to Maryland after the emancipation of Maryland's Constitution, I gave a speech, a friendly word to Maryland, in which I said, now that the monster of slavery is dead, let the shadow and the substance go down together and let them sleep forever in a common grave. What did I mean by that? Well, if you don't like the way leaves on a certain tree looks, it would do no good to strip the tree of all the leaves. The next season, what is going to happen? It will be coming back. Things have to be dug up from the root. If we're going to make this a more perfect union, we all have to come to some compromise that this is how we're going to live in this country together. And to force one side, coercion or whatever, is not productive. It does not help us find our future. Because in order to find our future, we have to know our past. And our past has more than one side. If I came to you, sir, and I said, I've lost a nickel. And you said, what does it look like? I said, well, it's shiny, it's round, and on one side it has a buckle. So now you only have 50% chance of finding the nickel. If I don't tell you the whole story, if I don't give you the other side, you cannot make up your own intelligent mind. This very book, I hope you are not teaching your children what to think, but how to think. This book is full of, in school at that time, arguments for and against slavery in the same book, side by side. You side, children, take the side of slavery. You children, take the side of emancipation. Let's see who comes out on top. Out of that process comes a very intelligent people. That's how I would answer that question, sir. Is there another question? Yes.
Did you have a relationship with William Still?
Yes, I did. I did. He was certainly one of the abolitionists on the trail. I mean, there are so many to name. So many, as a matter of fact. People criticize me for not giving credit to many people in my first narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. How could I? I was a fugitive. They said, you didn't mention your wife, Mr. Douglass. Yeah. Why would I? She was a free woman, but she was living in Lynn under protection of the Garrisonian movement. I was in England. If I had mentioned anyone in that narrative, they would have came and held them hostage until they found me out. So it wasn't until my later book, Life and Times, that you will see some of the names. Mr. Steele is mentioned.
Bounty hunters.
Yes.
Not good people.
Not good people. No. They would come to my jail here in Easton and rattle my cage. Boy, we're taking you down south. Yes.
And some were freed slaves.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, do you have any input about creation of the Freedmen's Bureau?
Yes, the Freedmen's Bureau, one of the most prominent leaders of the Freedmen's Bureau was John Mercer Langston. John Mercer Langston was born in Virginia, went to school, ended up being a lawyer and in charge of the Freedmen's Bureau. Now, the Freedmen's Bureau did a lot of things for our people. They established Freedmen's Village in Washington, D.C., for many of the former enslaved who lived in a village of about 300 people, and we all went there to assist those people with food, with education and such. I was there teaching reading. Sojourner Truth was there as a counselor and such. They established the Freedmen's Bank and Trust, which was a bank, several banks. I think there were 14 branches throughout the United States in which colored people would invest their money, borrow money for land, for banks, for schools, businesses, schools and such. They even nominated me as the president of the Freedmen's Bank and Trust. But it was in deep trouble. I mean, I took over the bank not because I knew how to cipher numbers, but because of my reputation. They thought that my reputation alone could keep a sinking boat afloat. Well, I say not even $10,000 of my own money kept the bank afloat. It went under. And I found myself in front of Congress trying to explain why this institution had become insolvent. And so the Freedmen's Bureau was part of Reconstruction, ran very well by John Mercer Langston. But of course, it all dissolved together with the end of Reconstruction. Well, I thought I might, yes sir, one more question?
Yes. Being Marshal of Washington, D.C.
Yes, sir.
What kind of a job was that? What did that entail? What was your responsibility there?
Well, a lot of formality mainly, sir.
Yeah.
I mean, I had the endorsement of a lot of people, including Mark Twain, who was a big friend of mine, and he wrote a letter endorsing me, and then he wrote another letter after Grant was president. So a lot of formality, giving speeches, showing up at cabinet events, being there in the White House when they had many of the gatherings of other state governors and such, as a representative of the police force in Washington, D.C. There was one time where I stuck my foot in my mouth. I went over to Baltimore and made a speech about how great the Baltimore policemen were, and the policemen in Washington, D.C. didn't like that too much. Yeah. So before I leave, I thought I might give you all a sample of my oration, and it's a speech that's near and dear to my heart. I gave this in 1875, April of 1875, in Washington, when they erected the monument, the Emancipation Monument. I was the keynote speaker. And so this is oration on the memory of Abraham Lincoln. Fellow citizens, I warmly congratulate you upon the highly interesting object which has caused you to assemble in such numbers and spirit as you have today. We stand today at the National Center to perform something which is to go into history. Harmless, beautiful, proper, and praiseworthy as this demonstration is, we cannot forget that no such demonstration would have been tolerated here 20 years ago. That we're here in peace is a compliment and a credit to American civilization and a prophecy of still greater progress in the future. I refer to the past not in malice, for this is no day for malice, but simply to congratulate all upon the contrast between now and then. With the long and dark history of our bondage behind us, and with liberty, progress, and enlightenment before us, I again congratulate you on this auspicious day and hour. We're here with the stately pillars in the majestic dome of the Capitol looking down upon us. We're here with the foliage and flowers of spring for our church, and all the races, colors, and conditions of men for our congregation. We're here to express as best we may our grateful sense of the vast services rendered to our race, to our country, and to the whole world by Abraham Lincoln. Fellow citizens, we fully comprehend the relationship of Abraham Lincoln both to the colored people and to the white people of this country. Truth is beautiful and proper at all times and in all places. It must be admitted, truth compels me to admit, that Abraham Lincoln was not, in the fullest sense of the word, either our man or our model. In his interest, in his habits of thought, in his associations, and in his prejudices, he was a white man. He was predominantly the white man's president, entirely devoted to the welfare of white men. You are the children of Abraham Lincoln. We are at best his stepchildren, children by adoption, children by the forces of circumstance and necessity. For while Abraham Lincoln saved for you a country, he delivered us from a bondage. Therefore it shall be asked what we have to do with the memory of Abraham Lincoln, or what Abraham Lincoln has to do with us. The answer is, though he loved Caesar less than Rome, though the Union was more important than him, than our freedom or our future, under his wise and beneficent rule, we gradually saw ourselves lifted from the depths of slavery to the heights of liberty and manhood. Can any colored man or any white man, friendly to the cause of freedom for all men, ever forget the night which followed the first day of January 1863, when the whole world waited to see if Abraham Lincoln would prove to be as good as his word? He was assailed by abolitionists. He was assailed by slaveholders. He was assailed for not making the war an abolition war. And he was bitterly assailed for making the war an abolition war. But he calmly and bravely heard the voices of fear and doubt all around him. And he had an oath in heaven. And there was not power on earth to make this honest boatman violate that sacred oath. But dying as he did, by the red hand of violence, killed, assassinated, not because of personal hate, but no man who ever knew Abraham Lincoln could hate him, but because of his fidelity to union and liberty, he is doubly dear to us. So, fellow citizens, I end as I began in doing honor to our friend and our liberator. We may calmly point to the monument erected in the memory of Abraham Lincoln. Thank you so much.